Good evening and welcome to tonight's Bible study. I just realized after reading the entire proverb and looked up at the thing that it wasn't recording, so I started it over. Proverbs 25. These are more Proverbs of Solomon compiled by the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah. It is the glory of God to conceal a matter. To search out a matter is the glory of kings. As the heavens are high and the earth is deep, so are the hearts of kings are unsearchable. Remove the Drows from the silver, and a silversmith can produce a vessel. Remove wicked officials from the king's presence, and his throne will be established through righteousness. Do not exalt yourself in the king's presence, and do not claim a place among his great men. It is better for him to say to you, "Come up here," than for him to humiliate you before his nobles. What you have seen with your eyes, do not bring hastily to court, for what will you do in the end if your neighbor puts you to shame? If you take your neighbor to court, do not betray another's confidence, or the one who hears it may shame you, and the charge against you will stand. Like apples of gold in settings of silver is a ruling rightly given. Like an earring of gold or an ornament of fine gold is a rebuke of a wise judge to a listening ear. Like a snowed cool drink at harvest time is a trustworthy messenger to the one who sends him. He refreshes the spirit of his master. Like clouds and the wind without rain is one who boasts of gifts never given. Through patience a ruler can be persuaded, and a gentle tongue can break a bone. If you find honey, eat just enough. Too much of it and you will vomit. Seldom set foot in your neighbor's house. Too much of you and they will hate you. Like a club or a sword or a sharp arrow is one who gives false testimony against his neighbor. Like a broken tooth or a lame foot is reliance on the unfaithful in time of trouble. Like one who takes away a garment on a cold day, or like vinegar poured on a wound, is one who sings songs to a heavy heart. If your enemy is hungry, give him food to eat. If he is thirsty, give him water to drink. In so doing, you will heap burning coals on his head, and the Lord will reward you. Like a north wind that brings unexpected rain, is a sly tongue which provokes a horrific look. Better to live on the corner of the roof than share a house with a quarrelsome wife. Like a cold water to a weary soul is good news from a distant land. Like a muddied spring or a polluted well are the righteous who gives way to the wicked. It is not good to eat too much honey, nor is it honorable to search out matter that are too deep. Like a city whose walls are broken through is a person who lacks self-control. As we have worked our way through Proverbs 25, we see that this proverb here starts off, it says, more Proverbs of Solomon compiled by the men of King Hezekiah, king of Judah. And this is one of Solomon's descendants. Actually, years have gone by because Hezekiah was several kings away from Solomon. And apparently, books were lost, and Hezekiah, being a good king, compiled some of these wise sayings that his great grandfather wrote. And the first one, he starts out with, it is the glory of God to conceal a matter. To search out a matter is the glory of kings. And so there are many things that God conceals from us, but at the same time, we are to look for those things. As a matter of fact, God intentionally does not just reveal things to us. There's a saying in the Bible, Jesus says, "Seek and ye shall find, knock and the door shall be opened, ask and it shall be given." If you search, that's what you should do. if things are just given to you easily, it's not worth as much. It goes on and said, as the heavens are high and the earth is deep, so is the heart of kings are unsearchable. And what that means here, for me anyway, is that we should be searching, we should be looking for what God wants to reveal in His Word to us. The next couple of Proverbs is one and the same, in my opinion. Verse 4 and 5, it says, remove the drows from the silver, and a silversmith can produce a vessel. Drows is the extra waste material in silver. It's impure silver. And if you remove the impurity, the bad part of the silver, then the silversmith can make a vessel, or produce a vessel. The same thing we see here. By removing the drows, you can produce a vessel. Remove wicked officials from the king present, and his throne will be established through righteousness. And if you read the history of the kings, especially the king of Judah, Hezekiah was a good king, but his father was a bad king. His grandfather was a good king. And that was the way it was. It went from one generation to the next, where you had good kings, bad kings. And the thing that made the king good or bad quite often was their advisor. As a matter of fact, speaking of the advisors, the moment that Solomon died, the first thing his son did was remove all the good advisor and replace them with his friends. And his friends were looking out for their own interests rather than for the king's interests. And so the thing is that for me anyway, these two proverbs go together, because this not only works for kings, but it works for you and I. By removing bad influence and bad things in our lives, then God can establish us. Unfortunately, a lot of us don't realize that just like you have to remove the drows from silver to produce a good vessel, you have to remove bad advice from your life, bad people, bad influence from your life, so that you can be established. The advice continues with this, verse 6. Do not exalt yourself in the king's presence, and do not claim a place among his great men. It is better for him to say to you, come up here, than for him to humiliate you before his nobles. And I understand this proverb only too well. While I was a chaplain, and specifically the head chaplain at the federal prison, once a week we had a weekly meeting with our warden and the associate warden and all the other department heads and assistant department heads, depending upon the department. And we sat around a huge table. The warden sat at one end, the captain sat at another, the associate warden, they sat in their normal spot. And some people kind of vied to sit at the table, and some other people, like myself, I always sat, in the second row, so to speak, along the wall, not up at the table. And the people who were sitting at the table obviously were the warden, the associate warden, the captain, the important people. And quite often somebody would come on in and they would try to get a seat close to the quote-unquote great people, the important people. And I've seen it happen once or twice where it says it is better for him to say to you, come up here, than for you to go and sit in a spot, and then you come along and I've seen it, person sat in a spot and somebody more important came along, and they basically, associate warden or warden came along and said, hey, that's my seat, and they had to move. And here everybody else just see them having to move. And so this is good advice. I learned it pretty early. And the reason I learned it was I had read the proverb, and it says, do not exalt yourselves in the king's presence, in the boss's face. Don't put yourself out there, because you do or say something and you can be humiliated. And it was always better when I became head chaplain, like I said, for the boss to say, hey, chaplain, why don't you come sit here at the head table, than for you to go sit there and then they move you. And so, and that is the same thing in life. Don't try to grab the head seat. Jesus had a parable about that, don't grab the head seat, because somebody more important may come along and you get moved. The next few has to do with your neighbor. And I want to put a couple of these together. Verse Verse 8 says, "What you have seen with your eyes, do not bring hastily to the court. For what will you do in the end if your neighbor puts you to shame? If you take a neighbor to court, do not betray another confidence, or the one who hears it may shame you, and the charge against you will stand." Skipping down to verse 18, "Like a club or a sword or a sharp arrow, he is one who gives false testimony against his neighbor." And here we see it's dealing with your neighbors, dealing with people that you know. And you end up in court for whatever reason because of disagreement between you and your neighbor. And again, as Christians, we are called upon to always tell the truth. And verse 18 makes it quite clear. Like a club, a sword, or a sharp arrow is one who gives false testimony against a neighbor. So we are always to tell the truth. Because if you lie, eventually what will happen is lies will be revealed. And it will be found out. And just like a club or a sword, or you'll pay the price once people realize that you lied. And so what verse 8, going back up there, it says, "What you have seen with your eyes, do not bring hastily to court." Because here's the thing. Sometimes we see things and we don't get the whole story. And if we rush headlong without knowing the whole story, it says, "For what will happen to you in the end if your neighbor puts you to shame?" Because you might see your neighbor do something and you go up to court and say, accuse them of something. And then you find out, for example, a good example is back then anyway, or today, is if a neighbor puts down an animal and, they had to shoot their dog. And you rush to court and say, "Oh, your neighbor is hate dogs and they shot the dog and blah, 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 blah," And you've come to find out that the neighbor had to put down the dog because of rabies or because of something else, age, or they had to, and in the end, you have egg on your face. And that's what it is. If your neighbor puts you to shame, and having egg on your face or shame is one of those things we need to realize is. So it continues in verse 9. "If you take your neighbor to court, do not betray another confidence, or the one who hears of it may shame you, and the charge against you will stand." And I had to go to court a couple times for different reasons. And I remember one person who was put to shame because the charges stood against them. And so we need to be careful. Don't rush and make hasty judgment until we know the whole story. Otherwise, we can get egg in our face. Picking up at verse 11, it says, "Like apples of gold in the settings of silver is a ruling rightly given." Continuing this idea with a court and being in court and making decisions or making rulings, it's like apples of gold if the ruling is right. It goes on and says, "Like an earring of gold or an ornament of fine gold is the rebuke of a wise judge to a listening ear." And here we have the two sides of the coin. If the ruling is right, but it's against you, but you're willing to listen and learn, that's what it says. If you're willing to listen, the rebuke of a wise judge to a listening ear. And there are times that, we do need to be rebuked. We do need to hear the negative things about our lives in order to make correction. The word here should be constructive criticism. Nobody likes to be criticized, but if we do receive constructive criticism, somebody tell us, "Hey, this and this about you," listen to it, and it's like a gold earring or ornament of fine gold. I know over the years I've had a lot of people, mentors of mine, who gave me constructive criticism of what to do, what not to do. I remember as a teenager, one elderly lady talking to me about my speech and my grammar and all these different advice she gave me. And I could have just ignored it and say, blow her off. But the reality is she was right. It was constructive criticism. And to listen to constructive criticism and to adapt your life and to change because of the constructive criticism is very good. Verse 13 continues, like a snow cool drink at harvest time is a trustworthy messenger to the one who sends him. And so, as people of faith, we need to be trustworthy. And it says that, it goes on, it says, he refreshed the spirit of his master. He goes on and talks about, we are supposed to be trustworthy. We tell the truth. We are people of faith, people of trust. The next one, though, is not a good one. Verse 14, like clouds and wind without rain is one who boasts of gifts never given. And I know that the Jews understood this only too well, because quite often they would see what appeared to be rain clouds coming, especially in that dry, arid area, and they would be expecting rain, and then they didn't get it. And I know Thanksgiving and Christmas is around, and a person that make promise about giving gifts and boast about what they have done but never have done, it's empty promises. And so the Bible is saying, don't make empty promise and don't boast about and give empty promise. I like verse 15 a lot. I want to talk about that for a moment. Through patience, a ruler can be persuaded, and a gentle tongue can break a bone. Quite often we think that a person who is angry and curse and all that is the one who wins arguments. But what I've discovered is, in reality, the moment a person has to go to cursing and hollering, and they already lost the argument because they haven't been able to argue properly. They resort to the violence and the bad language, and it's the gentle tongue that really speaks. And so it says, "Through patience, a ruler is persuaded." And so when we do get in discussions, disagreements, my best advice was, rather than be hot-headed and angry, remember to look at the other person's side and to have a gentle tongue, because as the scripture said, it can break a bone. It's never the hot-headed, boastful person, but it's a patient, kind, gentle person that breaks the bones, or break through the argument. Verse 16 goes along with verse 27. Let's read those and we'll put them together. If you find honey, eat just enough. Too much of it, and you will vomit it. Verse 27, it is not good to eat too much honey, nor is it honorable to search out matters that are too deep. Honey was one of those things that was very valuable. Obviously, in that day and time, over 3,000 years ago, practically, they did not have beekeeping like we do and honey that you could just go to the store. And so they would have to find bees and honey out in the wild, or try to, do something like that. But they did not have bees like we do. And when they found honey, sometimes somebody would be a glutton and overeat. And again, this has to do with overdoing it. Too much of a good thing is bad for us. Too much of anything is bad for us. And that's the advice here. If you find honey, eat just enough. Honey is good for you, but too much of it is bad for you. And one of the best advice I have is, too much of anything is bad for us. Too much of anything is bad for us. We should just eat, because if you overeat it, you will throw it up. And like I've seen it, too much of anything. I knew an inmate, for example, that drank too much water and depleted all the electrolytes out of his body, the salt and stuff, and ended up in the hospital. Water is good for you, but too much of it is bad for you. Salt, too much salt is bad for you. Everything has its place and its time. And so as I read that verse, I understand. For example, too much food is bad for you. We're tomorrow, Thanksgiving. A lot of us sometimes overdo it. I know I'm guilty of that sometimes. We fix too much food. But it's too much of it is bad for us. Verse 17, one that I take to heart and have taken to heart for quite a while. It says, never set your foot in your neighbor's house, too much of you, and they will hate you. Sorry, not seldom set foot in your neighbor's house, too much of you, and they will hate you. And I've had great neighbors, and I've had some neighbors that weren't so great. But even with my neighbors that were great neighbors, the advice is seldom, rarely set foot in their house. Too much of you, and they will hate you. And it's like whenever you go visit family members too, and I take this to be neighbors, family, friends, too much of anything is bad for you. If you have good friends and y'all live close to each other and your kids, go back and forth, that's good. But if you are over there all the time and they're never over at your house, after a while, you know the old saying, fish like company after a few days starts to smell. And once that smell starts up, they will hate it. And so that's the advice here. Seldom set your foot in your neighbor's house. Too much of you, and they will hate you. It's good to have good friends, but like anything else, the saying is, good fences make good neighbors. Too much of anything is bad. And that is when, with everything. And so the advice is don't impose yourself upon your neighbor, because after a while they will hate you. Verse 19, for we already did verse 18. Like a broken tooth or a lame foot is reliance of the unfaithful in time of trouble. The reality is, the proverb make it quite clear. A broken tooth, lame foot, they're kind of useless. They hurt. If you rely upon an unfaithful person in times of trouble, because they're unfaithful, they will leave you to fend for yourself. And so, again, my advice to you is make sure that you are a faithful friend and only rely upon faithful friends. As a matter of fact, I point out that your friends influence you, and make sure that you choose them wisely. I tell people I have about 4 or 5 friends. I have a lot of people who I'm friendly to, but here's the thing. I heard this advice. If you were down in Mexico, of all places, Mexico, you went on a vacation and you were in prison unjustly or thrown in jail for whatever reason, and that can happen in Mexico, for example. A true friend is someone, if you call them, they will come and bail you out. An unfaithful one is, in time of trouble, they will go, well, what did you do? You must have done something wrong. And in times of trouble, you want to have true friends that, they are there through thick and thin. They will help you no matter what. And I can say I have about 4 or 5 friends that it doesn't matter what problem I face, I call them and they will be there for me. I have a lot of other people I know, and they might say, I'll pray for you. Too bad this happened. But, they're not there. A couple of years ago, the last government shutdown, for example, one of my good friends that, he said, Ricardo, if you need any money, I have $10,000 you can borrow. He's a true friend. And, I didn't need the money, obviously, because after all, I've been in the government for 20-something years, and I've been through a lot of government lockdown, and I knew to save up and make sure that you have 6 months of money just in case something like that happened. Call emergency, a rainy day. But here's the thing. A true friend is one that is there and is faithful in time of trouble, because problems come. And so unfaithful friends, unfaithful people is like a broken tooth or a lame foot. Verse 20, like one who takes away a garment on a cold day, or like vinegar poured on a wound, is one who sings songs to a heavy heart. Again, person who is heavy, heart, down, depressed, there's not much you can do for them. the metaphor is like one who takes a garment on a cold day. And here in Minnesota, we know if you are outside and somebody takes your jacket, you're going to be cold. And if you pour vinegar on a wound, it's going to hurt. And the scripture is saying, if you sing songs to a person who is heavy-hearted, who is depressed, you're wasting your breath. Don't do it. You know. I want to switch now I know we have a few more minutes to the last thing that we want to talk about tonight. If your enemy is hungry, give him food to eat. If he is thirsty, give him water to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head, and the Lord will reward you. Jesus continued this, love your enemies, pray for them, give them food. This is where Jesus got that idea from, is if your enemy is hungry, give food. The natural instinct is if we have a person that is our enemy and they're hungry, is to say, oh my goodness, thank God, that, they got what they had coming or whatever. But as Christians, we are a people of love. And even if there are people who hate us, we are not supposed to give evil for evil. Whenever somebody hates us and give us evil, we are supposed to return good for evil. We are Christians and people of love, and we always do good. If our enemy is hungry, we are to feed them. If he is thirsty, we are to give them water to drink. See, the natural way is, your enemy is hungry, let them starve. If they're thirsty, let them die of thirst. They're our enemies. But as Christians, we don't, treat our enemies like that. We don't treat anybody like that. We are to love our neighbor as ourselves. It says, in so doing, you are heaping heaps of coal on their head. What that means is that we don't live like they do, and they would expect us to, because they hate us, we are supposed to hate them. But we are never to be a people of hate. If they hate us, love them in return. If they do something against us, don't get even. Don't try to, do an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth. Again, Jesus pointed out, love your neighbors, but love your enemies. Pray for them. Help them. We are always to do the right thing in the right way, not return evil with evil, but evil with good. We are people of love who do good. With that, I want to end today and say next week we're going to pick up at Proverbs 26. Hopefully, we'll finish up here before the end of the year, and we will then decide in the new year what we will do. But we will go ahead and finish up the Proverbs. See y'all next week, and have a happy Thanksgiving.